Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Let's Process That podcast with Emily and Nick. I'm Emily Christopher. This is Nick Honorkamp.
Hey, everyone.
We are so glad that you are joining us once again. At this point, just to kind of catch you guys up, our podcast just launched for us last week, and so we have just been getting all the feedback, all the questions, all the curiosity, and I first and foremost want to say thank you so much to everyone who has reached out personally, who's contacted our Facebook, Instagram, all the things. I'm overwhelmed by how kind and vulnerable and genuine people have been. And so just thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for giving us feedback. And it's just been beautiful. Nick, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just overwhelmingly positive conversations about that were stirred up by the podcast. And so it's like you and I shot a couple episodes in the blind, and then we put it out there to the marketplace, and the marketplace is kicking it back. And they're saying, hey, could you talk about this? Could you talk about that? What'd you think about this? This is what I thought when you said that. And again, just overwhelmingly positive and grateful to be in the conversation. I really want to make sure that you and I don't sound like any kind of experts, because all we're trying to do is create the city square and allow for people to come and join the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, we appreciate you guys. Thank you for liking, sharing, all the 5-star reviews and just lovely comments. It's been awesome. So thank you. Thank you. And I do want to speak to just those of you who have reached out already giving us some topics. We are working through that. And today we're actually going to I posted a little something on our Instagram this past week. And I was like, hey, what are some things you guys want to talk about? And immediately got feedback. And one of the reoccurring things, because I'm really big on patterns, and so is Nick, was managing expectations of other people in our lives. And what does that look like? How do we work our way through that? How does that feel? And that could be a whole series, I feel like. And so we may just be scratching the surface today, but it's definitely something we're going to dive into. And I also just want to keep encouraging you guys to message us and, say, hey, I would love to hear dialogue on this. We've gotten some hot topics thrown our way. And then we've gotten some other things where we're like, oh, we'll do that right now. That's awesome. We're ready to go. We could talk about that for hours. And there's other things that we want to come to the conversation prepared. And so we don't want to just like loosely give that out without us doing our homework and honoring that topic at hand. So
Well said. And what's fascinating is that both of us, being in the ministry, you read lots of books, you go to lots of leadership conferences, you know a lot of the major players and what their thought process is. And it's not that we don't study or we don't research, but it is also that we don't want to come to the table and say, hey, I have all the answers. Everyone listen to me.
Right.
So last night you texted me and said, hey, this is what we're talking about tomorrow. And you and I have not processed it. We've not had a chance to talk about it. I put some thought to it today. You put some thought to it today. It'd be fascinating to see some of the things that we come up with. And that's one of the things I love about this podcast is I'm not sure if you're going to agree with me, disagree with me, which direction we're going to go. You just threw me a topic and said, be ready tomorrow. And I appreciate your leadership on that and sending it my way, which actually I think came from a comment from one of our followers. Was that not correct?
Yeah. This topic was multiple people. We had about 3 people asked to talk about this over the last week or so. So we're going to dive right in. So actually, I'm going to pass it to you, Nick, just to kind of set you up. I know I mentioned this, but what all goes into managing others' expectations? What does that feel like? How do we work our way through it? Just what are your initial thoughts, even as I'm talking about, all right, expectations? What's the initial feeling?
I go 3 or 4 different places, but I guess, I'm going to pull back for just a second. Okay, so I'm assuming we're talking about managing expectations in a relationship.
Yes.
That family members, significant other, a partner, spouse, that we're in a significant relationship. Okay, before we even talk about managing expectations, the biggest problem that we have, most of us have, is we don't know what we want or need. And so how are we, and how are we going? We don't do the hard work to figure out. I'm the worst. I'm so self-sufficient. I don't even know what to ask for a want and a need. So the way I express an unmet need or want is frustration after you didn't read my mind and do what I needed you to do. So I think probably the first step is, are we aware enough of what we need in this season? Because every season changes. That's one of the things we've been talking a lot about is transition and seasons and how to know what you need in this season. And are we aware enough to be able to say, this is what I need and this is what I want? And then second of all, do we feel worthy enough? Do we have enough trust in this relationship to actually be able to say, can you give this to me? Going way back a long time ago, and I know we've already mentioned Henry Cloud in his book, Boundaries. In the book, he's counseling this girl, and she's complaining about her boyfriend. And he said, well, what do you want in a boyfriend? And so they started talking, and they came up with this list of stuff that she wants in a boyfriend. And he said, why don't you go now to your current boyfriend and say, hey, I finally figured out what I want. And it looks like this. And show him the list and say, I sure hope that you want to be that guy and can be that guy. If not, I got to peace out. But I'm going to give you the first shot at being this guy. But now I finally know what I want. And I thought about that and I thought, gosh, how many of us are so unaware of what we need that we don't even communicate it with our partner. And then the only time they find out is when our need goes unmet and we get frustrated and angry at them. What do you think about those things?
Oh my gosh. Yes and yes. And I wish that I would have grasped that a decade ago.
Oh, yeah.
And I know we're mentioning kind of romantic partnerships here.
Yeah.
But this kind of goes, well, it does go for any kind of relationship where there's an expectation, whether that's, a best friend or even, we can get into the whole work dynamic, all that. But we've mentioned a couple of times here that, we teach people how to treat us. And we have to, in ourselves, find out how to communicate our needs. But like you said, going back and saying, what the heck do I want?
Yeah.
And that does take some time for you to pause, step back, and really start examining your life. And what are those things? And if you don't know those things, how the heck are you going to communicate that to anyone else?
Yeah.
And, just as you're talking, I was hearing this recently with a friend. People were like, oh, I feel like your relationship with Adrian, my boyfriend, is so easy. They're like, you guys are just easy. And I'm like, it's probably because the day I met him, I was like, hey, I'm going through a divorce. I'm in therapy every week. This is what I am. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. And he was like, wow, I've never heard a girl communicate like that before. And to him, it was, well, he's a lot more reserved than I am. But it was probably refreshing, especially if you talk to people in the dating world right now, because it is just like chaos and nobody knows what the other person's saying. He has all these games. And so for somebody to be like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to like. This is what I want. This is what I need. And there it is. And I'm sure, I wasn't going in it like thinking like I've met the love of my life because I was like on a healing journey. But I think that set the trajectory for the rest of our relationship to be as healthy as it is now. Because right up front, I was like, here it is, buddy. Take it or leave it. I don't care if you leave it because I know I'm awesome. So somebody else will appreciate it if you don't. And he was like, no, this is great. Thank you.
That is so funny. I can so see you doing that. It's almost like you don't know what you don't want until you get into a relationship. Then you figure out, okay, I don't want that. And then you start by trial and error figuring out what you do want. And then you've got, again, back to my point, even if you know what you want in a relationship, do you feel like you deserve it? There's a lot of people I know that would never ask their partner, their boss, their friend to make a necessary adjustment to accommodate them because why would I be so selfish as to get my needs met?
Right.
But isn't a relationship truly a negotiation? I mean, isn't it like, you don't mind washing the dishes, but you hate drying them and put them up and you negotiate, okay, then you wash the dishes and I'll dry them and I'll put them up. It'd be my joy to do so. and
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out how to meet each other's need in an equitable way. And I think that if we're even going to talk about managing expectations, one, we have to know what we want and need. Two, have the guts or at least the trust. I mean, like a
Mm-hmm.
trust in a relationship to say, hey, this doesn't work for me anymore. Remember when I was telling you about the marriage counselor that every 90 days he and his wife sit down and renegotiate expectations? And I thought that feels robotic in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. And yet, if you don't put it on the calendar, when's it going to come up the next time? And if you knew that we're having the expectations date, then I wonder if you start preparing a couple of days ahead of time and say, this doesn't work for me anymore, but this
Mm-hmm.
over here probably would. And I think that if we're going to have significant relationships in our life, there has to be some place where you do a relationship performance evaluation. I don't know. I mean, it sounds sterile, but wouldn't we be healthier if we at least asked the questions?
Yeah, and I think the freedom in that is that can look like a million different ways.
Sure.
There's some people like yourself who are, I mean, I know if Tina like brought you like a survey and laid it before you'd be like, this is great. You're like,
Thank
yay.
you.
And
Mm-hmm.
bring me an Excel spreadsheet and now I'm
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
But for
Compare
other
them year
people,
over year.
yeah, look at how
Yeah.
we've grown. But then for other people, it really just looks like a casual kind of thing. And some people, and I feel like I'm mostly like this, like I'll just deal with it in the moment. So
Mm-hmm.
like, if I feel like I'm not getting what I need, I'll just immediately be like, all right, listen, I need more. We need to be talking more. Or we need this more. I need to
Right.
go out on a romantic date or
Right.
whatever. So I think that's another thing. Again, it all goes back to knowing yourself and knowing that you're worthy of love so that you can adequately communicate in your own way. And then also, I think the other big key thing here is communicating in a way that the recipient will understand.
Yeah. And
So,
can receive it.
absolutely. So, I know some people, if you write it down, if you wrote them a sweet letter, a little note, and you're just like, hey, here's some things I'd love to work on. Then when they read it, it's like that finally soaks in. Some people, I need to sit down, look you in the eye kind of thing. So there's just all these different variables, I guess, that go into it. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
you got to know yourself and you also need to know the person you're communicating with. Because if this person matters to you enough that you're going to
Yeah.
put expectations on them and they're going to put expectations on you, the least we can do is find out their communication style so that we both get a win-win. Because it's one thing if I just kept saying the same thing over and over and I'm like, he's not listening to me. Oh my gosh. But then for some reason, when I wrote it down, he got it or whatever. And this is just an example. But I think that's also a big key factor in the expectation realm is figuring out that communication part.
So that's fascinating because my boss and I have had big conversations for the last 4 months and talking about expectations, what I'm wanting to do with the rest of my life, what he's wanting to do with the rest of his life, how that fits, how that doesn't fit. I obviously work for him and I need to take care of his expectations more than he takes care of my expectations. But I also have choices too. And so we've talked about what's working, what doesn't work, and what adjustments we need to make. And because we meet once a month to talk about these things, I have an opportunity to, over that month, do a couple of the things that matter to him to say, I'm in the game. My heart's here. I'm doing the right things. I'm doing this because I want you to know that I heard you. It's not just having communication, because communication without any kind of follow-up results, any kind of effort, leaves people frustrated. And so, if somebody said to you, Emily, I'm in a new relationship, how do I, set expectations? One of the first things, I would say is, how do you communicate with this person in a way that gives them a chance to be able to respond to your needs and your wants? And so by having regular communication on the calendar, you can follow up and say, well, I told you that I need to be romanced a little bit, and you haven't taken me on a date in a while. And so we talked about that last month. Here we are again in 0 dates. So I'm wondering if you're desiring to meet my needs or not meet my needs, because we still don't go on dates. And it gives us a chance to at least look at it real time instead of like, I remember 6 months ago, I think you said something like this. And then we argue over that, whether I said it or not. versus we did have a legit conversation and you said you'd help out around the house a little more and I was going to take you on dates. What's happened with that? And so I think that's important too. Regular communication that both of you all can measure and follow up on.
And the hard part of that is owning up when you've not done the follow through.
That's the truth.
Because I know some people, man, if you bring that thing to them, like the follow up, where it's like, all right, let's look back, immediately defensive, like everything. They get so angry, and it's like, oh, okay, here we are. We're just having a conversation, and it's where that accountability part comes in too. In that, where, and I hate sometimes where we measure relational stuff with tallies and check marks. But if there is a major issue, like those things do have to come into consideration. If someone is begging you for something and you love them, like you have to make one step forward. I know in previous relationships, I would just be looking for like the smallest thing and I was so happy. And that's usually how most people are. They're not looking for you to, the next day be a completely different person because that's not a realistic expectation.
Absolutely.
But if we can see just a little bit of something, like the tide is turning, that buys us hope. And I think that is a real big factor in relationships. And what happens a lot of times is we've not been proactive enough early on. And I know not everyone is like me and just kind of says it how it is and there it puts it all on the table. But, the earlier we communicate, the better. The better we manage those expectations early on, the easier it's going to be. Because it kind of goes back to your story with the husband in the grass. It wasn't him not mowing. It was that there was a million other tiny things, and that just happened to be the final, and that was it.
So let me respond to that by saying, I always told my sons, it doesn't help me if it doesn't help me. And what I mean by that is, if I need you to take the garbage off because the garage stinks and today is garbage day, and instead you choose to cut the grass, and I come home and it smells, and I'm like, the garbage didn't get taken out, and you're like, yeah, but I cut the grass, and I'm like, that doesn't help me if it really doesn't help me, and what we need is get the house not smelling like garbage. And so it's possible that your partner is putting in effort and energy, but they might be putting it in an area that doesn't even matter to you. And until we identify what you do need and what you do want, then we can start putting that energy in the right place. And I think that's why I like love languages and, 5 love languages and all that's so important, because, they may be trying to love us in a way that we don't feel it. And the best thing we could do is help educate them what we need in this season. We may find out that they respond to that need or that want, and then we might learn more about our need and want because we're like, hey, actually, that didn't help much. Or I don't think what I really need is romance. I need trust. And I didn't realize that I thought if you were romancing me, it would build our trust quotient. What I really need is more communication and intimacy to figure out why I'm not still feeling safe in this relationship. So I feel like that big boy and girl relationships, not just romantic ones, are about having conversations where we're both at the table and both of our needs are represented. And we probably need to be more vulnerable and just talk about what we need in this season. And there's some seasons I can't carry any more stress, or I don't need any more house chores or whatever. But if I don't do the hard work of figuring out what I want, I force, somebody else to do the hard work of figuring it out when the wheels come off.
Yeah. And something that you mentioned, with like love languages, I think there are innate things in us that, I feel like I'll always be a quality time person. Like that's just who I am. But I also know in different seasons I've needed different things. Okay. And so being able to communicate that without like pulling the rug out on someone where they're like, oh, you don't want me to hug you anymore? Oh my gosh, you always were a hugger or like a cuddler or whatever. Being okay with people changing their needs in the different seasons. Like you were saying, there's some seasons like I've been talking all day long to people. I don't need to have an hour long discussion every night. I just need you to sit with me and just be in the room with me and like
Yeah.
bring that peace and energy that way. And then I have a friend who has 3 kids, and they're all under 5. And so all day long, she is being touched and like grabbed
Yeah.
on. And she's like, I don't want to cuddle with you. I want to be
Wow.
with you, but like I can't have you like
Yeah.
petting me and stuff like that. But to her husband, she's like,
Yeah.
I am touched out. So
Yeah.
my need in this season, like when you do the house chores or like that to me is like, oh, this man loves me. Like I get it. Like I don't have any
Mhm.
question in my mind whenever he does these acts of service, he loves me. So I think that's also another place of like self-awareness in managing expectations is understanding that they're going to change. They're going to change for ourselves, and they're going to change for our partners or any other relationship that we have depending on the season we're in. And
I
that's
love
good.
that. Great story, by the way, because if your primary love language is physical touch, and then you have 3 kids in 5 years, and you are now mama is overstimulated, she
Mm-hmm.
don't want any more touch. You know, brother might be sitting there going, "Whoa, what happened? We were really close and physical, and now the kids are all over you, and I barely touch you, and you're pulling back." But that would be the kind of thing we would talk about as managing expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Because mom probably is being pulled on and isn't even aware of it.
Right.
And maybe dad's like, I need some physical touch.
Mm-hmm.
Can we create an environment where the kids, maybe I take care of the kids for a couple of hours so that you don't have physical touch, so that then you're available for
Mm-hmm.
physical touch. But these are the kind of conversations that I think are going to go on the rest of our life. I mean, I can't imagine being married 50 years and still not needing to have some of these conversations.
And what's really sad is that a lot of our society doesn't encourage this.
Yeah.
Like they think, you got married and for the next 50 years, it's going to be the same thing, especially in the South. Like I see people, they've done the same things for the last 40, 50 years. And they've not grown together and they've not really grown, obviously, as individuals either. And so you can just tell they've never had that. Let's circle back and revisit this and have a conversation about,
Yeah.
mutual uh, respect for each other. We're both growing, we're both changing, and we give permission to each other to do that. And that's another thing that blows my mind is when we don't want the people that we love to grow or change. It's like, don't you want them to get better?
Oh my gosh. But and I both know I've seen particularly women go through inner healing, unpack some hurts, pains, wounds, whatever, and then encourage their husband to go through. And brother's not as emotionally mature as she is, can't handle it. And now we've got a marriage problem
Mm-hmm.
because one of them grew, one of them explored, one of them forgave, one of them moved on, and the
Mm-hmm.
other is still stuck.
Yeah.
And I literally have had couples come to me and I'd say, "Are you coming to the marriage retreat?" And they're like, "No, our marriage cannot stand a marriage retreat. If we change any variable or one of us starts to grow, divorce is imminent. So we're just going to stay where we are." And I just like, are you kidding me? I mean, that's miserable because right now, neither one of you get to change. Neither one of you get more of your needs met, but they were more comfortable
Mm-hmm.
and they got very comfortable with each other. And the thought of change was just so scary. And I want to grow and mature and change the rest of my life. So it is a tricky thing because again, what if you go to your boyfriend and you say, "Hey, there's a couple of needs of mine that's not getting met, and I'd like to negotiate with you the possibility of a couple changes." And they say, "Sorry, I am who I am. And if that's not enough, it's not enough." Now you've got a problem. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're not, trying to encourage anybody to go ultimatum anybody right now. We're just talking about managing expectations is you being aware of what you want and need and communicating in that way that you can have a conversation and a negotiation with the other person because they may say, "I'd like to do that for you. But in exchange, I have some needs that are not being met either."
Mm-hmm.
And now we've just got a whole bigger conversation going on.
Yeah. And again, the longer you leave that, the
Yeah.
harder it's going to be. And that's why as soon as you start noticing a pattern or you start saying like, gosh, there's like an emptiness in me, or we weren't as close as we used to be, or there's some weird habits being formed here, go ahead and address it. And again, I know we've mentioned this, there's most of you out there are probably not as confrontational as Nick and I, and we understand that. But I also want you to have the courage and the self-love and self-respect enough for you to communicate and advocate for yourself because you do deserve it. And I hope to God that the person that you are giving your time, all this energy to, your life to, would respect and honor you enough to have some kind of compromise. A give and take, or like, all right, let's try this for 3 weeks, 3 months. Like, let's see where this goes. And be okay enough to adapt or to adjust where it should be. And these are not crazy things. We're not talking about like, well, I want a yacht. I want a big old boat. These are not things. We're talking about like your emotional needs, like things that are going to better your person. So this person that you're with should automatically be like, heck yeah, like, let me adjust. It's going to take some time. I'm going to need some grace, but let's start doing some steps forward.
So, and when you were just saying that, I just went back, and I have not talked about this much publicly, but I remember after 20 years of marriage, I said to Tina, is there anything I can do to become more attractive for you? And she says, yeah, you could lose some weight, put on some muscle, get some sun, and a tattoo. And it was so effortless. It came out in like 5 seconds. I said, how long have you been holding this? But I never asked that question. And when I asked the question, her gun was loaded. And she laid it all out there and said, well, brother wants to be more attractive, then this is what you ought to do. And I did all those things. And so anyway, it's just, I that's probably a drastic example, but it's a backlog because I hadn't asked that question.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I wasn't having quarterly reviews. So we did a 20-year review. And so it all came at one time. But I'm with you. If you have those conversations, then you say, okay, really? All right, I didn't know that. And so, you start working on those things and taking care of those things. Usually, I would think most people would say, I either need more connection or I need more space. I would think that probably one of those two things in this season, if I could have a couple nights a week to just be by myself, I got some books I need to read. I need to do some journaling. I need some me time. Can you give me a little bit of space? Or I need more communication and connection around a certain topic or issue. Or I'm not feeling intimate with you anymore. We were intimate. Now it feels different. And how do we go about having these conversations? And I think that most people are open to that. You're going to have to be careful how and when you present that. You can't let the person be having the worst day of their life and you come bring your big old need and want to them. It may be part of a bigger conversation that you ease into. But I really appreciate where some of these questions came from. They're in seasons of transition. And they're trying to figure out new environment, new rules, and they're taking that seriously. And if they don't, who will? And so I love that you can have the same spouse, but your season change and need something different from your spouse and or lifelong friends and or family members. And so sharing those expectations, I think, are really important.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the reoccurring thing is early and often. Just like a Word document on your laptop. If you're typing a paper in college, they said, when do you need to save? Early and often.
Early and often. I don't know. Keep a list on the refrigerator and just keep it up there.
Yeah. And it's one small thing for me before, because I kind of want to take a small turn to exploring expectations in another area. But I think one of the biggest things, too, that we forget is that as we're evolving and changing, just to keep the grace going. Like you were saying, hey, if somebody's having a bad day, like don't start yelling out expectations during a fight. Like don't let those things happen then. When someone's anxiety is above a 7 and things are going like, let's go grab coffee. And don't keep it some mystery. I know a lot of people are like, we need to have a talk. That was always the thing in college when people would break up. They're like, we need to go have a talk. And it's just like, hey, I just want to chat about where we're at, how we're growing, how we're learning, and how our relationship is doing. It doesn't have to be some big, scary conversation where you come with like 10 bullet points and you're just going to rip them apart and then be like, now here's my new expectations. Slide it across the table. So yeah, just be aware of where that person's at.
I agree. Well said.
Awesome. All right. So we had the expectations in relationships.
Yep.
And that was a question. And then we also got how to manage expectations of your community or church life or family. That was kind of which is a whole nother beast. And I would love to go there. And if you want to kick us off, you can. If not, I can keep talking.
Well, I know you can. Well, to me, that sounds a little bit more like a boundary. And because it feels to me like, today I was part of a church service where one pastor was stepping down and a new pastor was being set in. And I went to the new pastor and said, what's your wife's role going to be in this church? Because it's your job to set the expectation to the congregation of what's her role. I mean, does she bake brownies? Does she teach Sunday school? Is she going to be a co-pastor and preach on Sunday mornings? But you have to set that expectation for them, or they will put their own expectations on her and she'll disappoint a whole lot of people. Or you can declare what your expectations are and she'll only disappoint a few people. And so I think that a lot of times, whether it's like, I only take so many counseling appointments a week, or I have these 2 days are my study days, or I only take appointments when it doesn't apply to this, this, and this, but we have other staff that can take care of that. And I think most people don't give themselves permission to set the boundaries and clarify the expectations, so people still think at any point I might be their best friend.
Yeah.
And they're never going to be your best friend because the relationship is based around the job. Does that answer your question at all? Does that move us at all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially anything that you're out in public. Or if you put, it's like even us putting ourselves out there on a podcast.
Sure.
People automatically think, I can say things to you, and which we've opened it up. We've said, go ahead. Sometimes people, when they put themselves out there, like, no, I don't want to hear the feedback. Like, I'm going to do this. But for us, we're like, no, we would like to interact and go deeper. But whenever more people have your influence, they're going to automatically start pulling on you. And so it's super important that there is a boundary put down so that expectation is so clear, because that will just lead to disappointment. And I've been in the same boat where, people thought, oh, well, I have access to Emily any time of day. I'm just going to pick up the phone at 10 p.m. and I go to bed early now. So I'm like, nope, you ain't calling me. At 10 o'clock, I'll be asleep. But there is definitely this thing where people, if you don't let people know, they're going to just push the boundary as far as possible.
That's it. And a lot of that comes from, do you give your cell phone number out? I never gave my cell phone out as a senior pastor, because if they could get to me, they would bypass everybody else they could. And unfortunately, I could not be the primary contact for every person in the size of our church. And so there comes a place where you have to start defining. I literally would do a time audit with several people every month and look at how many phone calls, how many appointments I took, how long I put in study, what meetings I ran, what meetings I went to maximize my calendar, because you just can't do it all. And then you throw in the people pleaser part, where you're trying to not disappoint anybody. And then the one person that gets hurt and all that's you.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage people to have healthy boundaries. I was just mentioning to you off camera, Brene Brown mentioned someone else in a quote in her Atlas of the Heart book. It says, boundaries are the distance that allows me to love you and me simultaneously. Boundaries are the distance that lets me love you and love me at the same time. Without boundaries, I'm either not loving you well or I'm not loving me well. And I think that just that one quote gave me permission to say, wait a minute, I shouldn't love you in a way that sucks the life out of my soul. And I shouldn't love you in a way that harms you either. So if we don't share our expectations, okay, you get 1 hour. And that's all we've got today is 1 hour. Or I can talk to you right after the church service, or don't call my cell phone, call my assistant, try to get an appointment. Those are expectations, but they're really closely tied to boundaries.
Absolutely. And it's so hard when, I know for me, one of my biggest struggles is not meeting an expectation.
Yeah.
And Especially I hate letting people down is the worst. It's like the firstborn curse.
Mm,
Because we have all this expectation automatically on us.
yeah.
And so my whole life, it's just been subconscious. And my mom, out of the blue, texted me a couple weeks ago, and she was just like, I am so sorry if there's ever been an unhealthy expectation put on you, like blah, blah. And I was like, well, where's this coming from? She's like, I've just been in prayer, and I just feel like I needed to like let you know that we are so sorry if there was ever anything on you. And I was like, well, first of all, Mom, the fact that you would even like be aware enough and sensitive enough to
Yeah.
uh even see that and then address it, thank you so much, I love you. But until I feel like you're away from certain things, you don't realize what expectations were put on you. And I'm learning a lot right now with how, being in ministry, just the heaviness of expectation and like
Yep.
having to be perfect, and always setting this example, and just a weight. And there's a lot of unhealthy weight that Christians absorb. We think we're the savior, uh, which
It's the
is
truth.
which is really terrible, and heavy. And I'm like, you're not supposed to be carrying that. You didn't do that. But yeah, it's just interesting to look back and be like, whoa, my whole existence for a season of my life was meeting everyone else's expectation, and my boundaries were just non-existent.
Well, and here's an interesting one. When I suddenly stepped down as senior pastor, it was really caught a lot of people off guard.
Mm-hmm.
But when I did that, my father had been a pastor. Then I was a pastor. When I stepped down, both of my sons came to me and said, we're so glad you stepped down. Neither one of us wanted to become a pastor, but we felt like one of us had to keep the family ministry going. And I didn't know. And I was like, what did I do to make you think that I expected you to become a pastor too? And they're like, you didn't do anything, but it's in our family line. So it's like, is he going to step up or am I going to have to step up? And I feel horrible that they had those expectations put on them. I think that we pick them up from all kinds of places.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the key is communication. When we can talk about what we really do need, what we really want, what we really expect, then we can clarify those. And just, can you imagine if you went to someone that you care and love and said, are your needs being met in this relationship? It could be a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And if they say, it's pretty one-sided, you take up all the oxygen and air. If you want to work on that, I really think we could have a better relationship. Gosh, maybe we start offering that to others before we ask them to adjust us. That might be a better strategy.
Hey, that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, and that piece right there is humility. And that's
So the question is, how many people in your life would you be willing to broach the subject and say, is there a way I can adjust to you? Those are probably the people you have the relational equity then to ask in exchange. So if you need to ask for something from somebody that you're not able to go and offer that to them, there might be an issue there.
Oh, that is so good. That right there is like the test. That's the thing that you need to bring
Wow.
before yourself. Am I willing to do the work as well?
Wow.
And just recently, I've kind of walked this path where I put down a very hard boundary with someone I love, and I was like, we've had our conversations, we've done our things. You think this way, I think this way.
Mm-hmm.
We agree on these things, and I want to keep this relationship as beautiful and fruitful as it is. But there's just some things that we're going to have to mark very clearly.
Love
And
it.
I said, I'm willing to go the extra mile. And because I want to love you, but I also have to honor myself.
Yep.
And I was terrified to do that. And this person immediately said, you got it. Absolutely.
I
And
love it.
so I have been going a little bit more out of my way because I love this relationship and I want to see it thrive. And it's beautiful, but it's been hard. That like conversation, I was shaking, and I'm not a nervous person. Like I don't get anxious. I don't have like, especially when it comes to confrontation, like usually I just come in and do my right hook and that's that. But because I valued it so deeply. And so, with that, it's been great. It's been a great couple of months of us being healthy and honoring one another and seeing that mutual respect played out. But I
I love
also
it.
had to be willing to say, I'm going to adjust here.
And I guarantee you they recognize the effort.
Mm-hmm.
And that will buy a lot of grace for hard conversations when the person says, wow, we had this hard conversation. Emily said she wanted to keep our relationship and she wanted to go even deeper. And then she went and made all these adjustments for me. This is a relationship I want to keep versus crickets
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
words or in actions. And so I love that you did that. And I think that's some really good advice. And I think we processed some stuff today.
Yeah. Like I said, I feel like when it comes to boundaries and expectations, there's so much there. And depending on where you're at and like what the issue is or the relationship is, it's so intricate and different and it's so personal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so navigating that does take some time and some grace. Grace,
Yep.
grace, grace. But I appreciate your insight, especially those of you who are wanting to kind of go deeper in this. I know you mentioned like Brene Brown. There was Dr. Henry Cloud. There's just some people who have written some stuff that if this is an area you're like, oh gosh, I really need to explore this, we would encourage you to do that. Atlas of the Heart, which is her most recent book by Brene Brown, is incredible. Like, woo, it is so, so good. I would definitely encourage anybody to go read it or download it on Audible. It's awesome. But there's a lot of good there, and maybe this is just a time for you to do a little self-examination and then with grace in your heart go have a conversation and you be willing to adjust just as much as you're asking the other person as well. There's definitely a back and forth.
Good advice.
All right. Well, Nick, I appreciate this conversation as always, and I appreciate all of you guys for tuning in and chatting with us. We want to hear from you. So please, in the comments below, or you can always write our Facebook or our Instagram at any time. We would love to hear from you guys and share your own experience. The more interaction we get, the more that we will actually use some stuff. And of course, we would always ask permission before we talk about you on the podcast, and we won't name you. Unless you want to be named. But we would love to start, like I said, this dialogue. And so please give us some feedback. Make sure that you connect with us on our Instagram, our Facebook page. Like I said, all of that is linked below in the description. You can follow us. We would love to have you a part of our community. And I know a lot of you are asking ways that you can interact even more. And we are working on stuff like that. We're looking into like Patreon and maybe a night where Nick and I will come on one evening and do like an hour where you guys can talk with us and it would be like something special. So we got a lot of things in the works. Obviously, all this is tailored to you guys. So if you communicate with us, we would love to just see where it goes. All right, friends, like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
See you, everyone.